So now let's look into the details of t-test. So we will ask a few questions and we will answer those questions with respect to the t-statistic or t-test, such as which test statistic it uses and which distribution it uses, which type of level of measurement or variables this test is applicable, which table it uses to calculate the probability, etc. So let's begin with our first question. Which test statistic does it use? The t-test uses the t-statistic as the test statistic. The t-statistic measures the difference between the sample means or proportions relative to the variability within the samples. So let's take this t-test, and it depends upon how many samples are involved, and it also dependent on whether you want to do this t-test with respect to the mean or proportion. Anyway, here with respect to the mean, we'll see in our next slide. We will be seeing what all possible tests that we can do using this. So mean of the sample and mean of the population or hypothesized mean of the population, and the standard deviation of the sampling distribution, and number of observations, n is number of observations. Okay, so that's what the first question. And now the second question that I want to ask is, which distribution does it use? Which distribution does it use? The t-test uses the t-distribution to calculate the probabilities and critical values. The t-distribution is a mathematical distribution that is similar to the standard normal distribution, which is nothing but your z distribution, but accounts for the uncertainty associated with the smaller sample sizes. This is also called as students t distribution. So this distribution is also called as a students t distribution. And the third question that we have here to ask is, which type of level of measurement or variables this test is applicable to. So the t-test is applicable when working with numerical data and comparing the means of two groups, or examining the relationship between a numerical variable and a categorical variable with two levels. So comparing the salaries of male and female, one example. So these are the various stages where various levels of measurements or various conditions where we can use t-test. First one, the t-test is applicable when working with numerical data, if it for a single variable, or can comparing the means of two groups. If you have one group data, you can directly use it, or you can use it comparing the two means of the two group 1, group 2 means. That is another way of using. And the third one, you can examine the relationship between a numerical variable and a categorical variable with two levels. The relationship between a numerical variable and a categorical variable with two levels. Example, comparing the salaries of male and female employees. So these are the conditions where we can use t statistic or t test. And the fourth question, which table does it use to calculate the probability? The t-test uses the t-table, also known as students t-table, to determine critical values and calculate probabilities. So the table provides critical values for different levels of significance and degrees of freedom. This is very, very important, the term degrees of freedom. So this table, the students T table, provides critical values for different levels of significance. One is levels of significance, and in addition to that, degrees of freedom is also very important, which is not a part of G test. In Z test, we use level of significance and respective probability value we will take up. But here, level of significance as well as degrees of freedom both matters here. The fifth question that we have here to answer is what Python libraries that support doing t-tests. First one, the scipy.stats, the t-test underscore int function in the scipy.stats module can be used to perform an independent two sample test. And the second one, the scipy stats model dot stats dot weight stats, the t test underscore int function in the stats models dot stats dot weight stats module provides additional options for performing t tests. So what's the next question? So the next question to be answered is how is this test performed? The first step is to define the null hypothesis, which is H sub 0, and alternative hypothesis, which is H sub A or H sub 1, based on the research question. So then choose the appropriate type of t-test based on the study design. Example, independent samples t-test or paired sample t-test. There are mainly two types. Under that, we also get it proportionate or mean based. Okay. And the third step, once uh, deciding with what type of test you want to go with, now it's time to collect the data for the two groups or variables being compared. Calculate the sample means, sample standard deviations, and sample sizes for each group. Then calculate the t statistic by taking the difference between the sample means divided by standard error of the difference. Then determine the degree, determine the degrees of freedom which depend on the sample sizes and study design. Then we have to use t-table or statistical software to find the critical value or p-value associated with the calculated t-statistic. Then compare the obtained p-value with the predetermined significance level, normally which is 0.05, to decide whether to reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis. And the last step for us, what we have here is, if the p-value is less than the significance level, reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there is evidence of statistically significant difference or relationship. Otherwise, fail to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that there is insufficient evidence to support a significant difference or relationship.